Ash Hollow, Pennsylvania, winter 1872. The snow had turned black long before the accident. Coal dust drifted in the air like a slow, endless storm, settling on rooftops, clothing, lungs. The people of the valley no longer noticed it. They had learned to live beneath a sky that never seemed clean. Beneath that earth, the mines breathed, deep and endless, their wooden ribs creaking with every shift of pressure, like old bones whispering. The Harrow family lived in a small clapboard house near the eastern pit. Samuel Harrow, a miner of 12 years, left before dawn every day. Lanterns swinging in the mist, his son Elias often following him halfway down the road before his mother called him back. The boy admired his father's courage, how he vanished into the ground without fear. But that winter morning the mist felt thicker, heavier, as if the earth itself was waiting for something. By noon the collapse came. Witnesses said it began with a low groan, deep and trembling. Then the hill shuddered and folded in on itself. The sound reached the town like thunder buried in the ground. In a single breath the shafts caved, and the mountain swallowed 30 men. Dust rolled across the streets, covering windows, choking the air. Women screamed. Bells rang. The world went silent beneath the ringing. Elias stood in the snow outside the mine office when they told them. He did not cry. He simply stared at the entrance, the dark mouth of the earth, then as rescuers rushed in. For 3 days they dug. The cold turned men's faces grey. Lamps burned until the oil ran dry. On the third night, when the last voices were believed gone, a faint tapping was heard below the rubble. They followed it, slow, rhythmic, desperate. When they broke through, they found the boy, lying beneath broken beams, his small body caked in soot, his eyes open and still. He whispered something as they carried him out. Something the rescuers swore sounded like a name, but not his father's. Elias Harrow survived. 19 others did not. For days he did not speak. His mother Margaret sat by his bed, washing the coal dust from his hair. His skin was pale, his voice a whisper, his eyes distant, fixed on something only he could see. The town doctor, Jonathan Reeves, examined him. No broken bones, no infection, only exhaustion and strange murmurs in his sleep. Reeves dismissed it as shock, a child's mind protecting itself from trauma. But then Elias began to speak at night. Not in fever, but clearly steadily. His mother would wake to find him sitting upright, whispering as though to someone at the end of the room. At first she thought he was dreaming, but soon she recognized words, names of men who had died in the mine. He said they were calling to him from below the stone. Within a week he stopped sleeping altogether. He would sit by the window, pale moonlight on his face, murmuring to the ground outside. Dr. Reeves tried to calm the mother, explaining that grief often breeds strange fancies in children, that dreams and reality blur under shock. But when Elias told her that Mr. Canning's lantern will go dark tomorrow, and the next day the old miner was found dead in his bed, the town began to whisper. They said the boy had brought something back from under the ground, something that listened when he spoke. Father O'Rourke came to bless the house. The priest had known the Harrows for years, God-fearing, decent folk. He sprinkled holy water across the doorways and told Margaret not to let the boy wander. But even as he prayed, Elias sat in the corner, his eyes blank, whispering in a voice not quite his own. O'Rourke froze when the boy repeated a line of the priest's sermon, one he had preached only once years ago, on the day Samuel Harrow was baptized. The words were exact. Even the inflection was the same. Dr. Reeves began keeping notes. He recorded each incident, each name Elias mentioned. In his journal, the entries grew darker. January 19th, the boy predicted the death of Thomas Greaves. Miner crushed under a cart 2 days later. Coincidence, perhaps, but his tone, not fear, not hysteria, calm, detached, almost as if he were relaying a message. January 22nd, he speaks of the earth as breathing, says it exhales when the wind stops. His eyes fixate on the floorboards, as though something is moving beneath them. January 27th, I asked what he remembers from the mine. He looked past me and said, "They're not gone, doctor. They're just waiting for someone to listen." The physician, a man of science, struggled to reconcile the impossible. Yet the town, small and desperate, needed an explanation. Mothers forbade their children from going near the Harrow house. Some said Elias was touched by God. Others said he was cursed. Sheriff Abel Crow warned the doctor that panic was spreading. miners refusing to enter the pits, women leaving offerings on the Harrow porch, crosses, candles, photographs. One night Reeves visited the boy alone. He found him awake, staring into the darkness of the floorboards. "What do you hear, Elias?" he asked quietly. The boy did not answer at first. Then he said almost kindly, "They're telling me who's next." The doctor left the house that night with the taste of dust in his mouth, a trembling in his hands he could not explain. In his mind the words repeated like the echo of pickaxes under stone. "They're telling me who's next." Outside, the wind rose across the valley, carrying with it the low, hollow groan of the mountain, as if the mine itself were still alive, whispering through the cracks of the frozen earth, and somewhere deep below Ash Hollow something moved. Something that had learned to listen back. By February, the town of Ash Hollow no longer worked in silence. The mine was sealed, but the people whispered. They whispered in the markets, in the church, in the narrow alleys where the soot still clung to the walls. They whispered about the Harrow boy, the child who had survived 3 nights beneath the ground, and who now spoke in the voices of those who hadn't. Dr. Jonathan Reeves tried to push the stories away. He had left the valley once, studied medicine in Philadelphia, believed in science and progress, not in ghosts that crept up from the seams of coal. Yet every time he visited the Harrow home, he left with a weight behind his ribs, like the air itself had thickened inside his lungs. Elias was changing. The boy no longer looked 9. His skin was pale and drawn, his eyes ringed with grey shadows. He spoke less, but when he did, his words carried a strange clarity, as if repeating something learned rather than imagined. Reeves noted that his pulse was steady, his reflexes normal. Yet his nights were consumed by whispers. He would sit by the cellar door, head tilted, listening. Once, Reeves found him tracing symbols into the dust with his finger, circles intersecting lines, crude but deliberate. When asked what they meant, the boy only murmured, "It's how they find me." The priest, Father O'Rourke, grew increasingly troubled. He told Reeves that Elias had confessed things no child could know, private sins of the dead miners, details never spoken aloud. The priest believed he was dealing with possession. Reeves argued it was trauma, a child's fractured mind echoing the voices of grief around him. They parted without agreement, the doctor retreating into rationality, the priest into prayer. But Ash Hollow did not care for explanations. The people came anyway, widows, mothers, the lost and the hopeless. They brought photographs, small trinkets, even letters. They begged Margaret Harrow to let the boys speak for their dead. At first she refused. Then one night, Reeves arrived to find a dozen townsfolk crowded in the narrow living room, candles flickering, their faces expectant. Elias sat in a wooden chair, his hands resting on his knees, eyes half closed. His mother wept silently in the corner. A woman stepped forward, Mrs. Callahan, whose husband had perished in the collapse. She placed his locket on the table and whispered a prayer. "Elias," she said softly, "can you ask him if he's at peace?" The boy did not answer. He tilted his head, as though listening to something far away. Then, in a voice not his own, rough, older, trembling, and he spoke, "Tell her the dark never ends. Tell her the walls still move." The candlelight faltered. Someone gasped. The woman fainted. Reeves forced the crowd to leave. He shouted, cursed, dragged them out into the cold night. Inside, the boy stared at the empty chair where Mrs. Callahan had sat. "They wanted to be heard," he said quietly. "But every time I listen, they pull me closer." Then he smiled, a small, tired smile, and blood trickled from his nose. The doctor wrote for hours that night, trying to make sense of it. He told himself it was mimicry, that Elias had overheard fragments of adult conversations, grief feeding imagination. But the pattern deepened. Within days of each session, someone connected to the visitor would fall ill or suffer an accident. A miner's wife slipped on the steps and broke her neck. A stable boy drowned in the river. Reeves could not ignore it anymore. He began mapping the events, names, dates, connections. Each line led back to the Harrow house. The whispers grew louder. Children said they heard voices when passing the Harrow yard. Dogs refused to approach the fence. At night, faint tapping could be heard beneath the ground, like the slow, deliberate knock of something buried alive. Margaret stopped sleeping. She begged Reeves to take Elias away, but when he tried to arrange it, the sheriff refused. "We've got half the town on edge," Abel Crow muttered. If we take that boy out now, they'll think he's the devil himself. Let the priest deal with it. So Father O'Rourke returned. He brought his Bible, holy water, and the certainty of a man who had seen sin wear a child's face before. The ritual began quietly, Latin verses murmured under breath, incense filling the dim parlor. Elias sat motionless. His eyes flickered, then fixed on the priest. The boy began to speak, at first softly, then with a force that made the air vibrate. "He's under your church," he said. "He's waiting for you to come back." O'Rourke froze. His knuckles whitened around the crucifix. The name Elias spoke next, a dead man's name, was one the priest had buried years ago, alone in secret. The exorcism ended in chaos. The candles went out. The priest fell to his knees, gasping, as though the air had been torn from the room. When Reeves lit the lamp, he found Elias unconscious, his skin cold as marble. The house smelled faintly of sulphur and coal dust. The next morning, the priest left Ash Hollow. He said nothing, only pressed Reeves's hand and whispered, "Don't let him near the ground again," but it was already too late. That evening, Margaret heard her son's voice in the cellar. She called to him, but when she opened the door, the candlelight revealed something drawn across the packed dirt. Symbols again, larger this time, carved deep into the earth with a piece of iron. Elias was kneeling in the center, whispering, "They're closer now. They're learning to speak through me." Reeves arrived within the hour. The air in the cellar was cold, damp, almost alive. He knelt beside the boy, saw the tremor in his hands, the black dust beneath his fingernails. "Elias," he said, "who are they?" The child looked up. "The ones who were left behind. The ones under us." His voice was calm, almost gentle. "And what do they want?" "To be heard," the boy said, "and for me to join them." That night Reeves sealed the cellar door himself. He told Margaret it was for safety, that Elias needed rest, light, distance from that darkness. But as he walked home through the frozen streets, he felt the ground pulse beneath his boots faintly, like something enormous shifting in sleep. The next morning, another death was reported. The mine foreman, found in his barn with his lantern shattered beside him. On the wall, scrawled in coal dust, were 3 words, "He's still talking." Reeves burned his notes that night, but the whispers did not stop. They had only begun. March came to Ash Hollow with a rain that never stopped. The hills bled mud. The mine shafts seeped water like open wounds. Most families had moved away by then, leaving their houses to rot in the fog. But one window still burned at night, the Harrow house, where a single lamp glowed behind drawn curtains, and where the boy's whisper was said to echo long after midnight. Dr. Jonathan Reeves had stopped visiting for weeks. He told himself it was mercy. That distance would help Elias recover. That time would silence whatever haunted the child. But the dreams returned, always the same. The mine collapsing in slow motion, dust turning to ash, and a voice from below repeating his name. "Jonathan, we're still breathing." The final straw came when Margaret appeared at his door in the rain. She was barefoot, her eyes hollow. "He's gone," she whispered. "He went under." The doctor didn't need to ask where. He took a lantern and descended toward the pit. The path was half buried, slick with black mud. The air grew colder with every step, filled with that smell he could never forget, wet stone, oil, and rot. The entrance to the old shaft was boarded, but someone had pried the planks loose. He lowered the lantern, and the light fell upon small footprints pressed into the damp earth. The tunnel stretched downward, narrow and suffocating. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became. Drips of water echoed like ticking clocks. The flame trembled. Then carved into the wall he saw them, symbols. The same ones Elias had drawn in the dust, only larger, older, burned into the rock with soot and ash. Circles within circles, crossed lines, strange runes that seemed almost mathematical. He traced one with his hand and felt warmth pulsing beneath the stone, as though something alive beat inside. He followed the sound. It wasn't a voice at first, only a low hum like wind trapped in a bottle. Then words began to form, distant, layered, whispering over one another, 100 voices speaking at once, rising from beneath the floor of the earth. "We are here." "We are waiting." "We are beneath." The tunnel opened into a hollow chamber. There, scattered across the ground, were remnants of the mine, broken helmets, rusted picks, collapsed beams. But between them, half buried, were objects that didn't belong to any rescue team, Melted candles, bones wrapped in cloth, fragments of toys. Reeves knelt. In the center of the chamber lay a circle of stones blackened from fire. Inside it, written in charcoal, were words in a child's handwriting. To hear them, you must listen where they sleep. Then he saw him. Elias stood a few feet away, barefoot, his hair matted, his skin pale as dust. The boy was speaking softly to the dark, his voice echoing through the hollow like the wind itself. Reeves stepped forward. "Elias!" he called. The child turned slowly, eyes wide, unfocused, and the doctor froze. In those eyes he saw the reflection of the lantern flame, but it burned downward, like a mirror into the earth. "They taught me how to listen," Elias whispered. "They said you would come." Reeves approached carefully, the light shaking in his hand. "Who taught you?" "The quiet," the boy said. "It breathes under everything. Father is there. They all are." His voice broke into a strange rhythmic chant, not words, but the sound of inhaling and exhaling over and over, like the earth itself breathing through him. Reeves reached for the child and felt the ground shift. The walls groaned. Dust fell from the ceiling. Somewhere deep behind them a wooden beam snapped. The floor gave a sigh like a dying man. The boy smiled faintly. "It's waking," he said. Then the collapse began, the chamber shuddered. Rocks split open, lantern glass shattered, and the world filled with noise, an impossible living roar. Reeves grabbed the boy, pulling him toward the tunnel, but Elias resisted, turning his face toward the fissure that split the chamber floor. From it came light, a dim red glow pulsing like the beat of a heart. "They're calling," the boy said. "They want me home." A slab fell, striking Reeves's shoulder. He stumbled, dazed, coughing in the dust. When his vision cleared, Elias was gone. Only his small footprints led toward the fissure where the red glow still throbbed like a wound. The doctor screamed his name until his throat tore, but only the echo answered. When the rescuers found Reeves hours later, he was half buried, clutching a broken lantern. His hair had turned almost white. He spoke little of what he saw, only muttering about the breathing earth and the child who went back. The sheriff sealed the shaft for good the next morning. The town never reopened it. For weeks afterward, Reeves wandered the valley searching for signs. He claimed he could still hear tapping under the ground, slow and deliberate, as if someone were knocking from the other side. In his journal, his final entry for March 28th reads, "I found drawings in the hollow, not just his, but dozens. Some date back years. Children have always gone missing near this place. Perhaps the mine did not make the voices. Perhaps the voices made the mine." The entry ends there, the ink smudged by water. Margaret Harrow left Ash Hollow that spring. She never spoke of her son again. But the doctor stayed. He said someone had to listen, in case the voices rose again. Neighbors would see his light moving near the sealed shaft at night, hear him talking softly to the ground, as though answering someone unseen. And sometimes, when the wind shifted through the valley, they swore they could hear a child's voice whispering back. Faint, rhythmic, echoing beneath their feet. "Doctor, I can still hear you." Ash Hollow, Pennsylvania, autumn 1873. The town no longer existed on any map. A year after the mine was sealed, the company had gone bankrupt, and the valley was left to rot beneath the mist. Roofs collapsed under the weight of unending rain. The chapel bell rusted in silence. The sign that once read Ash Hollow Mining Co. hung crooked, half buried in weeds. Only the blackbirds remained, hundreds of them, nesting in the broken rafters, their cries echoing down the empty main street like the memory of a scream that refused to fade. Dr. Jonathan Reeves had not left. He lived alone in the old infirmary, now a ruin of warped wood and mildew. He had dismissed his practice months ago. The locals in the neighboring county called him the ghost doctor, for he spent his days wandering the abandoned mine paths, his lantern flickering through fog that never lifted. His hair had turned white, his handwriting thin and trembling. But he kept writing. Journals, letters, transcriptions of whispers he claimed were not his own. Every night at 3:17 a.m., he would wake to the sound of tapping beneath the floorboards. 3 knocks, a pause, then 1 more. Always the same rhythm. He would write in his ledger, "It comes from below the house now. The shaft was sealed, yet it has found another way." He tried to ignore it at first. He tried prayer, morphine, brandy, but the sound persisted, patient as breathing. Then one morning, as the fog lifted for the first time in weeks, he found an envelope at his door. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting small and uneven, the kind used by children still learning to hold a pen. It read, "Dear Doctor, you stopped listening." Why did you stop? They still talk every night. The quiet has grown hungry. I'm still listening. Why he burned the letter, or thought he did. But when he awoke the next morning, the ashes lay on his desk, perfectly reformed into the shape of the words. For days afterward, Reeves walked through the empty streets, searching for signs of life or death. The Harrow house stood empty, its windows shattered, its roof caved in. Inside, he found remnants of a family that had once lived. A cracked teacup, a torn dress, a child's shoe, and on the floor of Elias's old room, a single line carved into the wood. "The ground remembers." He knelt and touched the words. The floor felt warm. Then he heard it, faint, distant, like a sigh rising from beneath the boards. It was not a voice exactly, more a vibration, a heartbeat pulsing under the house. He stood perfectly still, and in that silence a whisper came through, soft as dust. "Jonathan." The doctor fled the house that day, but by nightfall the whisper followed him home. It spoke through walls, through water, through the wind that crept beneath the door. And when he dared to sleep, it entered his dreams, always the same scene. The hollow chamber, the red glow, and a small figure standing within the circle of stones, eyes reflecting fire from below. "You left me there," the boy would say. "Now you must take my place." Reeves began to write again, not as a scientist but as a confessor. His journals filled with entries that read like prayers turned backward. They call through the veins of the earth. Every mine is a mouth. Every silence hides a pulse. It does not feed on bodies but on remembrance. The moment the living recall the dead, it awakens again. Elias was not possessed. He was chosen, or perhaps created. The collapse was not an accident. It was a door opening. He sent letters to the diocese pleading for Father O'Rourke's return. The reply came weeks later. The priest had died that spring in Boston, drowned in the river during a sermon. Witnesses claimed he had walked straight into the water while shouting, "It's under the church." The doctor stopped eating after that. He spent his evenings on the hill overlooking the valley, watching the fog drift over the old shafts. Sometimes he saw movement within it, faint shapes like men walking with lamps far below the surface of the ground. But when he blinked, they vanished. One evening, a stranger came. A young journalist from Philadelphia, Henry Lawson, had heard of the vanished town and the mad doctor who still lived there. He arrived unannounced, his boots sinking into the wet clay of the road. Reeves, gaunt and trembling, greeted him with surprising calm. The journalist wrote later in his diary, discovered decades afterward, the man's eyes were colorless like smoke. He spoke gently, as though afraid to wake something sleeping between us. When I asked why he stayed, he smiled and said, because he might come back and someone must hear him. Lawson spent 2 nights in the infirmary. On the second night, he woke to the sound of knocking. Faint, regular, beneath the floor. Reeves was sitting by the lantern, listening with his ear pressed to the boards. "He's closer tonight," he whispered. "Do you hear it? The rhythm? That's how they speak. The same pattern the miners used when trapped. But this is deeper." Lawson admitted later that he did hear something. A pulse, a hollow vibration that seemed to travel through the bones rather than the air. He left at dawn and never returned. By mid-autumn, Reeves was alone again. His journals grew erratic, whole pages filled with repetitions of a single sentence. "The quiet is not empty." Then, one evening, during a storm that shook the valley like a drum, he saw light near the old shaft, a flicker faint and red, exactly where the fissure had once opened. Against reason, against fear, he took his lantern and went out. The rain was cold and thick, turning the ground to black mud. The wind carried the smell of iron and smoke. As he approached the site, he saw that the earth had shifted. A narrow opening now gaped where the seal had been. The light within it pulsed, steady as a heartbeat. And then came the voice, soft, clear, the voice of a child. "You promised to listen." The doctor knelt at the edge, trembling. "Elias," he whispered, a pause. Then the boy's voice again, closer. "We're not gone, doctor. We're just underneath." The ground shuddered. A gust of hot air rose from below, smelling of coal and rot. Reeves hesitated only a moment before lowering himself into the darkness. The descent was shorter than he remembered. The tunnel walls pulsed faintly with warmth, as though lit from within. His lantern flickered and died, but the red glow ahead guided him. The air grew heavy, thick with whispers, dozens, hundreds of them, weaving through each other like breath turned to language. He recognized some voices, men he had known, patients, miners, even the priest, and beneath them all the smallest, clearest one, Jonathan. The tunnel opened once more into the hollow chamber. But it was not as before. The stones were gone. The walls shimmered as if wet. The air moved, breathing in and out. In the center of the chamber stood Elias Harrow, unchanged, as though a year had not passed. His clothes were clean, his face pale, his eyes bright with something not human. "You came back," the boy said. Reeves tried to speak, but no sound came. The light around them pulsed with each of the boy's words, as if the chamber itself were speaking through him. "They've been waiting," Elias continued. "They wanted you to understand. You tried to cure what isn't an illness. But this place doesn't take lives, Doctor, it keeps them." He stepped closer. His feet made no sound on the ground. "Do you hear it?" he whispered. "The hollow isn't the mine. It's the space between death and remembrance. You opened it when you refused to forget." Reeves backed away, shaking his head. "You're not real," he rasped. "You died in the collapse. I saw—" The boy smiled almost tenderly. "You saw me go back. There's a difference." The voices rose then, 1,000 whispers forming a single tone, deep and resonant, vibrating through the doctor's bones. The walls rippled like lungs inhaling. The boy reached out his hand. "You wanted to listen," he said. "Now you will never stop." The light engulfed them both. When the rain ceased 2 days later, the valley was silent again. Searchers from the neighboring county found the doctor's lantern near the collapsed shaft, still burning faintly though the oil was gone. Of Dr. Reeves there was no trace, only his final notebook. Found inside the infirmary, its last page written in a different hand, smaller. Childlike, October 17, 1873. "The breathing has stopped. The quiet is full now. He's here with us. The listening never ends." After that, the valley was abandoned completely. Locals in the next county spoke of strange sounds after storms. Knocking under the ground, whispers in wells, the smell of coal drifting through open windows at night. They said that sometimes, if you pressed your ear to the earth near the old mining road, you could hear a faint, rhythmic tapping, 3 knocks, a pause, then one more. Some claim to have found scraps of paper near the river, written in a child's hand. "Dear Doctor, the quiet is wide now. I can hear you from everywhere." By 1880, Ash Hollow was erased from state records. The land was sold to a lumber company, which cut down every tree and filled the mines with concrete. But the workers never stayed long. They complained of headaches, of voices in the dust, of hearing their own names whispered from the soil. Several went missing in the fog. The company abandoned the site once more. Epilogue, 1901. Pennsylvania Historical Survey from the recovered journal of Dr. Jonathan Reeves, entry undated. What we call death is not absence, but echo. Every buried voice waits to be heard again. The boy was only a vessel, the first to listen long enough for the echo to become a door. If you ever come to Ash Hollow and you feel the ground breathe beneath your feet, do not listen too closely. The hollow is patient. It only needs your silence to answer back.